Hi folks, and welcome back to the course. In this lesson, we will create our character VP, our player VP. So the first thing that we want to do is to extract the sprites of our character. Here in the assets folder, in the wizard one, we will have the sprites that we will be using. As I explained in the lesson before, Unreal imports this as a texture, so we may see the image a little blurry, and this is not what we want. So we can select all of this, then right click, sprite actions, and then apply paper 2D texture settings. Now we see this as a crisp sprite. Okay, now we want the idle animation. So right click, sprite actions, and then extract sprites. Unreal by default will auto select the sprites, but this rarely works good. So we are changing the sprite extract mode to grid. And now we have something like this. Here in the grid we have the cell width and the cell height. In this case it's very easy to extract the sprites, since we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 sprites. So we know that we have to divide the cell width by 10, and this will be 140. But maybe it's not always that easy, and one very easy trick to do is just select this divided by 10, and we will have all our sprites with the same length. Okay, now click here in Extract. We will have something like this. With all of our sprites selected, we right click and then create flipbook. I will leave the default name, and if we hover we can see the animation. Also, if we double click we can also see animation and a lot more of details. We don't want to modify this, but what we want to do is to have a better organization here. So here, when we have our wizard, let's create a new folder called sprites. And let's take all of our sprites and move them to this new folder. Just click, drag and drop, and move here. Also, we want another folder called flipbooks, and let's put our new flipbook here. Okay, so now here we will only have our sprites, flipbooks, and the texture. Okay, now here in our content drawer, in content, let's create a new folder, and let's name this one BPs. BP for blueprint. Double click, and here right click, and let's create a new blueprint class. These are the most popular classes that we can create with Unreal, and for our character we may want to use the character one. But since we are using sprites, let's click here in all classes and let's search for paper. We will see a lot of maybe new classes, the paper flipbook actor, paper sprite actor, but the one that we want is here in pawn, character, and paper character. So click here and then select. Let's name this one player, oopsie. With F2 you can change the name, so player BP, or could be also character BP. Let's double click to open it. And here we can select in the player BP or with the sprite the flipbook. Here in source flipbook, let's search for the idle one. And it's the only one that we have. Let's save this. And now we have our actor. Let's compile. Let's minimize this. And let's put our actor in the scene. Let's rotate it a little bit. And let's hit the play button. Now we have the default character, but now we can see our actor in our game. I think it looks cool. This combination of 3D assets, 3D scenario with a 2D character. But now we can control our character yet, and we want to control it instead of the default pawn. So in the next lesson we will learn how to set the game mode. So I will see you there. Hi folks, and welcome back to the course. In this lesson we will create our game mode and set our player as a default pawn. So here in the content drawer inside of our BP's folder, we right click and let's create a new blueprint class. Here in the common ones we find the game mode base. Let's click here and let's name this one GM_RPG. Double click to open it. And here we have the options to set our default pawn class. So here, instead of default, let's search our player BP. Make sure that it has this kind of a sprite icon. And let's save it. Also, in later lessons, here in the event graph, we will control the logic of our game. Now we have the game mode, but we have to set it as a default one. So let's go here in Edit, Project Settings, and let's find here in Maps and Modes. Here we have the default game mode. The game mode base is like the default that Unreal creates for us. But now let's select the one that we have just created, the GM_RPG. Also some options that may be useful to set now. Here is the default maps. When we open our project, it by default will open in this level. And we are not using it. So let's select the main. Let's save this. And we can close the settings. Okay, now if we hit the play button, we can not move anymore or even see our character. But let's press Shift and F1 and then here. And we can see that we have two players. And why is this happening? Let's stop. And here we have this icon that is the player start. We can see it here in our outliner, and also we have our player BP. It's the one that we placed before. We can delete this now. Okay, now we can select the player start and rotate it 90 degrees. So our player now will be face this. But we still have a problem. We cannot see our player, neither the complete scenario, or at least know how we want to see it. So we have to set a camera and a spring arm to our player. So in our player BP, if you have this view, click here in Open Full Blueprint Editor. And in the viewport, let's add two new components. The first one, we want to add a spring arm. Let's add a spring arm. let's add a camera. Okay, now our camera will be facing our character, but we won't see anything as it's a sprite. We have to set it something like this. So let's, here in the spring arm, let's change the rotation. So maybe something like this. And we want to have like a view from the above. So maybe something like this also will work good. Let's see how it looks in the game. I think it looks nice, but it's a lot too close and is completely at the center. We won't see the enemies when we spawn them. So let's go back here. And first, here in the target arm length, let's increase this at least to 600. Obviously, you can try different lengths to find the one that you like the most. Also, I want to change the location. Maybe something like 300 and the x-axis. And let's compile. Let's go back and test it. Let's hit the play button. I think it looks a lot better. Maybe just a little bit to the left, but for now it works good. You can change these settings as much as you want to find the one that suits you better. Okay, so now we have our game mode and our character. We can still do nothing here, but in the next lesson we will set the UI buttons so we can control and interact with our player. So I will see you there. Hi folks, and welcome back to the course. In this lesson we will set the UI buttons so we can control and interact with our player. So let's first open up our content drawer, and here in the content let's create a new folder called UI. Here right click and select the user interface widget blueprint. You can also find this one in the blueprint class, but it's easier if we select it from here. Make sure to select the user widget and let's name this one Actions WBB. That stands for widget blueprint. Now double click to open it. And the first thing that we want to do is to add a canvas panel. So select and drag and drop. Now here we can start to add something maybe like a button. And inside a button I want a text so it reads the action that we want to perform. I will use some text just as a placeholder, something like action 1. Okay, now let's make our button a little bit bigger and set the anchors. I want this to be in the center, so press Ctrl and Shift to move our button and also set the anchors. Now here, to give more personality to our button, let's change the style. So here in Appearance, Style, we can change how our button looks when it's pressed, when it's hover, or its normal appearance. To choose which image we want to use, let's click here in our content drawer, in Assets. In the UI folder you have a lot of options, but I will use the ones that are here in the Buttons folder. I will use this one, the button blue slides. So I will select it, and here in the where we can choose the image, we can only click here, and that's it. Our button looks a little bit weird, so let's change the size so it fits better the texture. Maybe set the size to something like 300. And the size on the Y, maybe it's something like 90. A lot better, right? It still looks a little bit blurry. But why is this? Because we need to set the paper 2D settings to the texture. So select all, then right click, sprite actions, and apply paper 2D texture settings. Now it looks crisp and nice. Let's continue to set the style. Now when we hover the button, we want to use this one. The button hover 3 slides. Just click here and then in this arrow. You can also find the image that you want to use maybe from here, but I think it's a little bit easier if we just select it in the content drawer and then just here. And that's it. We maybe don't see the changes now, but when we play, we will be able to see these differences. Okay, now let's set the text so it's at the center. And we can make this with the padding. We can change the bottom padding to 13. And now it looks good. Let's duplicate this button so we have at least 2 actions. Let's reset the X position and move the Y position something maybe like 90. And finally, I would like to add an image as a background. I will use this one. So just drag and drop. And do something like this. Whoops, now we can't see our buttons. To avoid this, we only need to rearrange this in the hierarchy. So select the image and drag and drop to the upper part. And that's it. Remember to set also the anchors to the center. Same thing. Control, Shift, and then click. So when we play this, it shows as we want. Finally, maybe some final size touches. I like something like that. We can save this, compile, everything's working good. Now we have to add this to our player. So let's go to our BPs folder and open up our player BP. Let's go to our viewport. And here in the components, let's add a widget component. Make sure that this widget can receive hardware input so we can interact with it. And let's select the widget class here in the user interface. Let's select the one that we have just created, the actions WBP. Looks a little bit weird, so let's adjust it. Maybe rotate first 90 degrees. And I want my buttons to be maybe somewhere like here. And why not a little bit in front of our character? Maybe not in front, but behind. Something like this. Let's save, compile, and take a look in our game. Let's hit the play button. Now we can see that the color changes. If it's normal, we hover, and if we press. We cannot do nothing yet, but in the next lesson we will make the interaction with these buttons. So I will see you there. Hi folks, and welcome back to the course. In this lesson, we will create the interaction of our buttons. So let's first open up our player BP. And here we can make the buttons look a little bit smaller because I think they are too big. Maybe something like that. We can adjust them while we play. And now in the event graph, let's create a new custom event. So right click, let's search for custom event, and let's name this one maybe something like attack, or just only action 1. We can change the name later. And this will print a string. So let's take the execution node and search for print string. And let's put something like the player attacks. You can change the parameters here, but the default ones are nice for now. We only want to see if the event is working good. Okay, let's go to our actions widget blueprint, and instead of here in the designer, let's go to graph here in the upper right corner. Now we have blueprints. First, we want to have a reference of our player. So here in the event preconstruct, let's cast to player BP. And now right click and get player character and connect it to the cast. So if the player character is our player BP, that it will be true, we want to set a new reference. So from here we can promote this to a variable. Let's name this one player ref, and we set it. Now we can access the player and his methods. In this case we want the attack event. Okay, let's go back to the designer, select one button, maybe the action 1. Let's go to the bottom, and we cannot see the events. And why is this happening? Because we have to set this as a is variable, and that setting is over here. So make sure to click this and compile. Now we have all the events of this button, and we want the unclicked one. So from here we can just drag and drop the execution node, and we won't see the attack event because we need a reference of our player. And we already have it, the player reference. So drag and drop and get player reference. And now we can call the attack event. And now we can link this to the button. Let's compile. And we can go to the level and try this out. Let's hit the play button. Let's click the action 1. And here we can see the player attacks. And it prints as many times as we push the button. If we press the other one, we won't see anything. But it's because we didn't bind this button, only this one. In the future, the idea is to, instead of have here in the player just only a string, to control the behavior of our player. So we can maybe attack or heal the player of any action that you want. So in the next lesson, we will create and spawn the enemy. So we'll see you there. Hi folks, and welcome back to the course. In this lesson, we will create and spawn the enemy. So let's first go to our content drawer and extract the sprites that we're gonna use. So here in assets, fireworm, and here in worm we have all the textures. So remember to apply the paper 2D settings by select them all, right click, sprite actions, and apply paper 2D texture settings. Let's first extract the idle one. So right click, sprite actions, and extract sprites. Remember to set the sprite extract mode to grid. Let's count how many sprites do we have. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So we have to divide this by 9. And then click in Extract. With all of our sprites selected, right-click and create flipbook. Let's go back to our Fireworm folder and let's create 2 new ones. One for the sprites and one for the flipbook. So we have more organized stuff. Let's put the flipbook here and also the sprites. Okay, now we can create our enemy blueprint. So let's go to our BPs folder. Here, right click, blueprint class, and let's search for paper character. Select, and then let's name this one enemy BP. And now double click to open it. And here let's select the source flipbook. Let's search for the one that we have just created. And that's it. Let's save, compile, and now it's time to spawn our enemy. So how are we making this? The most important thing that we need when we want to spawn a new actor is to have an actor class, and that will be the enemy BP. And the next thing that we have to do is to set the transform. Where do we want to spawn our character? The location, if we want to change the rotation, and if we want a different scale. The most important parameter is the location. So, based in our enemy, in our player, we will calculate the distance. So, if our player is here, we may want our enemy something like this. And even we want maybe to give a little of variation also with this axis. Let's return the player start to the original position. And now let's go to our game mode. Yeah, let's click here in Open Full Blueprint Editor. And now let's go to our event begin play. And we want to set a sequence node. So we can first set the location where we want to spawn our enemy, and then we can spawn it. Okay, since we want to spawn our enemy based on the player location, let's get a reference of our player character. Let's make this a variable and let's name player ref. You can see the new variable here. Let's take the first execution node. Then we want the location. So let's get actor location. And also we want this to be a variable. Let's call this one player location. Let's take the execution node. And finally, from here, let's add to this location so we can set the enemy one. Let's right click here and split struct pin so we can manage every axis individually. So remember, we want to set first a little variation on the y-axis and also in the x-axis. So for this, let's use a random float in range. For the x-axis, we may want something like from -200 to 200. And let's use the same node, random float in range, for the y-axis. And for this, maybe something like 500 to 700. We don't want to modify the z-axis since we don't want our enemy to appear in the air. And that's it. Let's also promote this one to a variable. And this will be enemy location. All these variables will work for us in the future. And that's it. We now have set the location where we want to spawn our enemy. I will make the event graph a little bit bigger so you can see every change. I will move all of this just a little bit to the right so we have plenty of space here. Here with the sequence node, with the second execution pin, let's spawn our enemy. So let's take this one and let's search for spawn actor from class. And here we can select what we want to spawn. In this case, let's search for our enemy BP. Let's split the spawn transform so we can modify each of these parameters. From here, we want the enemy location and put it here. Let's save. Let's return the event graph here. Let's compile and let's give it a try. So it's spawning correctly. At least it's spawning. We have to make a little correction with the rotation. We can make it directly in our enemy BP or with the spawn. I will try to make it directly with here. Let's take a look to our enemy. Something like this, and we want to face our character. So maybe we can rotate to something like -90 degrees. Save, compile, and let's try again. And that's it. You can see a little variation where our enemy spawn. If you want to adjust this value, you only need to go back to your game mode and adjust this to float, this random floating range. And that's it. Now we have our enemy. In the next lesson, we will apply the properties that our characters will have. So, I will see you there.